What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So just let's start things off straight away. So you've got your camera, you decided to take the jump from automatic to manual. You now know what ISO, shutter speed and aperture is, but when you point your camera to shoot at something, your image is either coming out too blue or too orange, and that's because your white balance is incorrectly set. Now we're going to get into what white balance is and what it does and how it affects the image. So what is white balance? White balance is basically the camera's ability to understand what white is, the color white, under different types of light. It's the camera's ability to understand that the white that it's seeing is white. Just simply because our eyes are amazing and we can perceive what colors are in a natural environment. No matter how bright or dark things are, we understand that a color is a certain color. However, cameras are not as adept to color and light as we are. So we need to set things as white balance just to help it understand and render the colors as accurate as it can for us to be able to get the best image out of them. Now the different lights that we have are usually depicted as two different types of lights. Daylight and tungsten light, which are both measured in something we like to call the Kelvin scale. Daylight is measured at 5600, whilst tungsten is measured at 3200 Kelvin. Now what is daylight and what is tungsten? Daylight, as the name implies, is if you're outside and you're shooting during the day, then you would set your camera's white balance to daylight. However, if you're shooting inside and the lights that you have around you give off this like warm glow, like this light here behind me and the side to the right of me, then you usually set your camera's white balance to tungsten, so you can get the whites to appear white and render the image as much as possible. However, me personally, my white balance is actually set at 5600 Kelvin because my main source of light, which is coming here from the left hand side, is giving off a daylight temperature of 5600 Kelvin. And I'm using these warm lights behind me and to the side of me as more of like fill lights to give the whole overall image a warmer tone and still keep my skin tones as natural as possible. Now, like I mentioned before, these lights are measured in something we call a Kelvin. And a Kelvin essentially basically means that whether a light is warm or if a light is cooler. The lower the Kelvin number, the warmer the light will be, and the higher the Kelvin number, the cooler it will be. So think of these as blue lights and warm lights. The lower the number, the warmer it is, so the more orange it will be. And the higher the number, the cooler it will be, so more towards the blue end. Now the Kelvin scopes from camera to camera can vary. If you have a really nice high-end camera, your Kelvin scopes can really push from 2000 all the way to 8000. But some of the older cameras usually limited between 3200 Kelvin to 6000 Kelvin. So I'll give you a few examples of what the different Kelvins are and what they reflect to in terms of light. So 2000 Kelvin will be the same as candlelight, and anywhere between 2800 to 3400 will be tungsten lighting. Now 4500 Kelvin is usually associated with fluorescent lights that you'll typically find in offices and those white lights that you get in industry type places like offices essentially. And usually when you're filming under these places, you're going to get this really horrible maybe greenish tints, and they're not very nice to film under. So if it was me, I'll stay away from these types of lights because you will have to do a lot of color correction in post to be able to get the right look that you want. Now 5600 to 6500 usually represents daylight. And so when you're filming outside, you usually want to be setting your white balance to around these numbers. And finally, 8000 Kelvin is usually associated with moonlight. So if you want to emulate that moonlight type effect that's shining in through the window, then you want to be setting your Kelvin or your white balance to around 8000 Kelvin so you can get that effect. Now, how do you set these white balances onto your camera? And now right off the bat, most cameras will have 6 different modes that you can play around with, so make sure that you get the right white balance for your camera. The first one is auto white balance, which is great for when you just want to pick up your camera and you want to shoot and you don't have to worry about if the colors are going to come out right, blah 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 blah. Auto white balance is great for this because you can really just pick it up and just start shooting. Next is daylight, and this is usually marked by a little sun symbol, and this will let your camera know that you're shooting outside at roughly around 5600 Kelvin. Now overcast or cloudy will be typically marked by the symbol of a cloud, and this will let your camera know that you are shooting outside but you're shooting under shady conditions. So your camera will be set to around 6500 Kelvin to get the best rendering within the image and the colors. The next mode is indoors, and as the name suggests, you're shooting indoors, but you are shooting during the day, and this will be marked by the picture of a house, so you can set your white balance to that, and it'll just essentially know that you are still shooting under relatively light conditions, but you will be heavily shaded, so it will set its white balance in according to where you are. The next white balance mode that we have is tungsten, which will be marked by a light bulb, and typically you'll be shooting under artificial lighting, which gives off this really warm color tone. And so the camera will recognize that these artificial lightings are radiating roughly around 3200 Kelvin, so that's the white balance that you want to set to if you are shooting in such conditions. And finally, we have manual white balance, and this is for people who want the full control of what their camera is seeing, and this will also give you full control of the Kelvin throughout the scale. And as I mentioned before, some of the newer cameras, they'll give you a full range between 2000 to 8000. On some of the older cameras, you only get 3200 to 6000 Kelvin. And if you want to go lower than 2000, you're reaching that infrared mode or infrared section that specialized cameras are used for. And anything above, I think, 10,000 Kelvin is the ultraviolet range. So just something to keep in mind when you're talking about white balance. So just give you a little bit more understanding of what the different Kelvins are. So here is the flowers in my balcony. Here we are again. And they are set to auto white balance. Now we have the white balance set to daylight, so you can see they become a little bit more cool. You can see a little bit more of the bluish tint coming through. This is the white balance set at overcast, so because we have a cloudy day, it's rendering out the images a little bit better. Now we set the white balance to indoors, so you can see a little bit more of kind of like an orange tint coming through in the image. And here we have the white balance set to tungsten. Now the image has become very blue because it thinks that the light source is very orange or warm around the 32 Kelvin mark, which it isn't, which is why it's making the image appear to be quite cool and bluish. Now, because the image thinks we're shooting under tungsten, it's become quite blue. However, if we were to put a warmer light here, like a tungsten light for example, the color of the petals will render out as white, and you'll be able to see the difference between the image and the clarity of the colors. So here I'm just about to turn on a warm light, and there you can see that the colors has changed from a blue tone, more of a white tone, leaving the white balance to be corrected. Now another way to set your white balance is by using something we call a white card or a white piece of paper. And essentially is you take a picture with this white piece of paper or this white card within the frame, and then in your custom settings of the white balance, you set that picture to be rendered by your camera, which will usually give you pretty accurate results when it comes to the white balance. Now me personally, I don't really use a white card or a white piece of paper when I'm doing my white balance, because I think I'm a pretty good judge of color when it comes to the white balance within my shots. However, that is biased, that's not for me to decide. You might think differently, so if you do, drop a comment down below and let me know what you think. But as always, white balancing is just a guide to get a nice looking image and not a definite concrete rule. You can always play around with the white balance to create the look that you want your image or your film to be. An example that I can normally think of is, I think I was watching Underworld or some sort of vampire film, whatever it might be, maybe a monster film, and they were shooting during the daytime, but I think they set their white balance really high up around the 8000 mark to try and emulate this kind of moonlight effect, or at the very least they made the image look really blue, essentially signifying that they were shooting in the late evening going into night. Now this can be done in many different ways. You can change the color tone of your image in post. However, I'm a firm believer that if you want to do anything, get it right in camera first and then worry about the post side of things after it's done. Another one that I can think of is Valentina Vee did this really amazing breakdown where she had white lights coming in from the background, but she set her camera's white balance to daylight, so the background lights appeared really blue and really cool. However, she lit her subject that she was filming with a tungsten light. This made the skin look really natural and rendered the color out perfectly, which I think is absolutely amazing. But these are just some of the examples of what you can do with white balance to create different sort of looks. And as I said before, white balance is just a guide and not a concrete rule to filmmaking or photography. But yeah guys, I appreciate you sticking around to the end of this video. If you learned something, amazing. If you did like it, then please give us a thumbs up. And just say hello down in the comments for me. It would be great to hear from you. And if you like content like this, then please subscribe to be notified when I get future videos and I'll upload them to you. But for now, take care and I'll see you soon.